In my classes, one of the things that we try and do is we try and help isolate the issues that are relevant, and we do thought experiments. So you take a science class on this campus, and they'll put on goggles and do an experiment and try and control for all kinds of things. And when I say thought experiments is you don't have to put goggles on or anything like that, but what you try and do is you try and think about, maybe you argue by analogy, or you try and construct thought experiments in such a way that you hold everything constant except for one variable, and you see in your mind's eye if that's morally relevant. And I'd like to think that in a lot of cases that clarifies thinking. But in my own case, the emphasis is not on trying to get students to accept one position and reject another position. Rather, is to try and develop the skills of critical thinking so that they'll be in a better position to decide for themselves based on the things that are morally relevant and not be swamped by things that are morally irrelevant. So let me give you an example of a thought experiment, which is really interesting. It seems like killing must be worse than letting die. Right? If you kill someone, you do something worse than let someone die. But there's a famous example, a thought experiment that Jim Rachels, who recently passed, came up with. He says something like this, I'm paraphrasing, but imagine Smith. Smith is downstairs making a peanut and butter jelly sandwich while her niece is upstairs taking a bath. And she realizes, boy, if my niece were to drown in that bath, I'd gain a large inheritance. So she goes upstairs, she walks in, and she pushes her niece's head under the water, and the niece dies. Okay? She's killed her niece. She's acted horrifically, no question. But now imagine Jones. Jones is downstairs making a peanut butter jelly sandwich. She says to herself, boy, I could make a lot of money if my niece were to die in the bath upstairs. So she sneaks upstairs, intent on drowning her niece. Just as she walks into the bathroom, the niece slips, falls, slides underneath the bathwater. Jones gets down on one knee, puts her hand over the head to push it back under the water if the niece is able to get up. She's not able to, she drowns. And so Jones just watches her niece die. It's an interesting thought example, right? Because you want to say that killing is worse than letting die. But in this case, the only difference between Smith and Jones, they had the same intentions, they were doing everything for the same reasons. The only difference is that Smith killed her niece, Jones let her niece die. And a lot of people think that Jones is just as morally culpable as Smith. And so it makes you question, maybe when you hold everything else constant, it turns out that killing isn't worse than letting die. Maybe we just think that killing is worse because often people who kill have worse intentions than the people who let die. But when you set up a thought experiment so the intentions are exactly the same, it's not so clear.